Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Episodes 4 and 5 of Ahsoka, which is the live-action Star Wars series about Anakin's former Padawan Ahsoka Tano that was introduced by Dave Filoni's animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars over a decade ago, as well as the characters from another Filoni series, Star Wars Rebels, premiered last week and this week, respectively, on Disney+. While both episodes had some interesting scenes, they both also had some common issues, which isn't actually anything new for this live-action series. Dave Filoni really likes to film a lot of scenes with poor lighting, so much so that both of these episodes have scenes that are difficult to see due to the unnecessarily low light levels. And unfortunately, both episodes once again have some unnecessarily long delays between spoken lines at times. Filoni also decided to make each of these episodes progressively longer than Episode 3, which is the shortest episode to date. Episode 4 is 42 minutes long, and Episode 5 is 49 minutes long. If each of these episodes had better lighting, shorter delays between spoken lines, and been edited better to be not as long, each of them would have been a lot better. So now let's examine some of the gory details for each episode. Starting where Episode 3 ended, Episode 4 begins with Sabine and Huyang inside of Ahsoka's powerless and very darkened ship attempting to repair it. It had been damaged during the melodramatic space battle during the latter part of the previous episode. Ahsoka is outside looking around in the dark, then Huyang goes out to make repairs externally. And as Huyang is making repairs, some pesky assassin droids spot him and the ship as Ahsoka and Sabine are inside chatting about as woodenly as ever, and that's when the assassin droids attack Huyang. Then Ahsoka and Sabine come out and again easily defeat the pesky assassin droids. I don't think that Filoni gets that having his protagonists frequently battle foes that they have already proven that they can easily defeat multiple times isn't particularly compelling. So once the pesky assassin droid scene is done, Ahsoka and Sabine set off with Huyang telling them that they'll be better off working together. And that line essentially forewarns the audience that the opposite is going to happen, which is not particularly good writing if you were to ask me. So sure enough, not long thereafter, they run into angry blonde Shin Hati and the unemployed former Imperial Inquisitor, who are both waiting to battle them in the darkened woods, much like you'd see in a video game. And I just want to point out here that you're very likely never going to hear me use the word compelling to describe anything that happens in Ahsoka, nor have we even gotten to this episode's interesting scenes yet. And as you might have guessed, Ahsoka once again battles the unemployed former Imperial Inquisitor as Sabine once again battles Shin Hati, because it always has to be the same characters battling each other throughout this series, apparently. But then something good happens. Ahsoka destroys the unemployed former Imperial Inquisitor, whose character was never well developed and consequently he was never that interesting. He was just predictable fodder like you'd find in a video game. And when he dies, he's just some poorly lit green smoke, which for anyone who had watched the animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars, that was a sign that he had been imbued with powers from the Night Sisters. But thankfully, that was the end of his pointless story in this series. And since Ahsoka defeated her foe while Sabine is still fighting Shin Hati, guess what happens? They separate. Just as we were essentially told by Huyang not that long before in the episode. So while Sabine and Shin Hati continue fighting, Ahsoka runs off to find the map generating the planetarium over the substitute Stonehenge, and Baylan's skull is waiting for her. This is just like what you would experience while playing a video game scene in which you're fighting increasingly more powerful foes. But given that this was the first encounter in the series between Ahsoka and Baylan's skull, it was actually the first highlight of this episode. Unfortunately, they both had too many delays between their respective spoken lines, but their lightsaber duel was memorable. And not being a Mary Sue like Rey Palpatine, Ahsoka actually loses the fight and falls off a cliff into the ocean waves below. Naturally, of course, this is a bit melodramatic given that this was only episode 4, so obviously the main character of this series isn't going to die. But she does find herself in an interesting place and runs into the spirit of her old Jedi Master, Anakin Skywalker, as played by a CGI de-aged Hayden Christensen. In the meantime, Sabine manages to temporarily defeat Shin Hati and arrives at Stonehenge just in time to see Ahsoka being defeated by Baylan Skoll. So Sabine grabs the map containing MacGuffin baseball and threatens to destroy it, but she doesn't. Instead, she watches Skoll defeat Ahsoka, who falls. Then he seduces Sabine into handing the MacGuffin baseball back to him as he promises not to hurt her. Sadly, Sabine is truly stupid and does what he tells her, with Shin Hati showing up wanting to harm Sabine. But Skoll orders her not to, and the three of them leave and head to Morgan's ship, with Ahsoka awakening in the world between worlds. But the episode doesn't quite end there. Hera arrives with 5 X-Wing fighters just in time for Morgan Elsbeth to put her giant ring-shaped ship into hyperspace to head towards a distant galaxy, which causes several of the X-Wing fighters to crash into each other and be destroyed. That part I liked, but while I saw a number of hardcore Star Wars fans on social media get all excited about Hayden Christensen appearing as Anakin, I only regard Episode 4 as being slightly better than Episode 3, since Sabine being so easily seduced was just one more badly written plot device to move the story forward. But what happens in Episode 5? Sadly, it was a longer episode that could have been edited down a bit, but it has one positive note: no Sabine. That's right, we don't have to deal with annoying Sabine for an entire episode, though she'll probably show up again in the next one. We also don't have to see any of the baddies because they all flew off together towards another galaxy. Instead, much of this episode focuses on Anakin Skywalker, as played by Hayden Christensen, training Ahsoka about life in the world between worlds, which includes a lightsaber battle between them. Then it changes to a flashback of Anakin and a much younger Ahsoka, played by a younger actress, reliving an early battle that they had experienced together during the Clone Wars. The flashback includes a lot of live-action clone troopers running into battle, some who are wounded and being tended to by medical droids, and conversations between Ahsoka and Anakin, which again flares up into the two of them battling with lightsabers, with Anakin's occasionally turning red as he periodically reveals his Darth Vader alter ego. And while all of that is going on, Hera and the surviving X-Wing pilots are looking around for any signs of Ahsoka and Sabine. Hera's son Jason then sits down along the side of the cliff where Ahsoka fell, looking out towards the ocean with Chopper next to him, and he can hear the lightsaber dueling between Ahsoka and Anakin, though he doesn't know who is fighting. Then he eventually has Hera come over, and she too can finally hear the battling lightsabers. Chopper then suddenly obtains a position to Ahsoka floating in the water. So Hera and the X-Wing fighters go back out and find her and pull her from the depths because she was floating unconsciously around 10 feet or so below the surface. She didn't drown though, and she eventually comes to and finds herself on board a ship and goes outside to find the destroyed map containing MacGuffin baseball. But fear not, by using the Force on the destroyed parts, Ahsoka can psychometrically sense what transpired between Baylan Skoll and Sabine after she fell off the cliff. So Ahsoka knows that Sabine was seduced by Baylan Skoll and left with the baddies. But when Ahsoka looks up, she sees the outer space tentacled whale-like creatures flying above, while Hera has a nasty gram hologram chat with Chancellor Mon Mothma, basically telling her that she may be suspended as being a general, which I was very disappointed with because it was the first time that the character of Mon Mothma has been shown in a negative light in the entire Star Wars franchise. But to find out where Sabine and the baddies went to, Ahsoka, Sabine, and the X-Wing fighters fly up towards the tentacled whale-like creatures where Ahsoka attempts to communicate with a large one, but Filoni didn't bother to let the audience in on what they talked about. Instead, there's just the camera looking at Ahsoka with her eyes closed and her arm outstretched as she communicates telepathically with the creature using the Force. Then, as pesky New Republic ships arrive to take Hera back for questioning and possible suspension, the X-Wing pilots delay them just long enough for Ahsoka and Hu Yang, who are inside her ship, to fly into the open mouth of the large whale-like creature, which then, along with the rest of the pod of creatures, go into space and eventually jump into hyperspace, presumably towards the distant galaxy where the baddies and Sabine went. And with that, the episode ends, and I described it in a lot less time than you having to sit through its 49 minutes. The live-action Clone Wars flashback with Anakin and the whale-like creatures jumping into hyperspace were good scenes, but much of the episode could have been edited down and sped up quite a bit, which would have helped it a lot. While Episode 4 was marginally better than Episode 3, which was the best of the first 3 episodes, Episode 5 was a mix of interesting and not particularly noteworthy scenes. To date, none of the episodes of Ahsoka have been truly awe-inspiring. The first episode was incredibly boring, with episodes 2 and 3 being progressively less boring and thankfully progressively shorter in duration. Episodes 4 and 5 could each have been shorter and should not have been longer than Episode 3's 35 minutes. In other words, the longer an episode is, the more likely it's going to have scenes with too little spoken dialogue, too little action, or both. For anyone who watched Filoni's animated series, Star Wars The Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels many years ago, the Ahsoka series will have a lot more nostalgic meaning than for anyone who never watched either of them. And I think that's part of the reason why this series has such low viewership numbers. In other words, it's only really appealing to a niche audience. But I will continue to watch the remaining episodes as they come out and will let you know what I think about them. And as I said at the beginning with Episode 1, Ahsoka is not going to resurrect the Star Wars franchise. Had the 2022 Obi-Wan Kenobi series been done well instead of being all about a very annoying and spoiled young Princess Leia and the annoying Inquisitor Reva, had the Book of Boba Fett been done well and had the third season of The Mandalorian not been a complete disaster, then the Star Wars franchise wouldn't be completely dead now. It might have had some actual life left in it, but the Ahsoka series coming off the heels of that disastrous third season of The Mandalorian simply doesn't offer up enough interesting content to attract a much broader audience than it currently has. It's not an awful series, but it's also not a tremendously good series either. It instead falls much closer to the middle, where I would classify it as being a better than average mediocre to lower than average good at best, and that's simply not a strong enough spark to act like a defibrillator to revive the Star Wars franchise. If the characters in Ahsoka were actually truly interesting instead of being mostly wooden and flat, this would be a much better series. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.